go ahead and kick things off. So, as I understand it, there are a couple different things that we wanted to discuss and get to today. One of which would be what parameters or configurations to set on the pump that Beanstalk would use as an oracle, which would require a BIP to change post beneath well deployment, as well as some of the trade-offs of making Beanstalk native assets like pods conform to existing ERC standards like 1155 versus the friction involved with proposing our own. So with that said, maybe Publius, I think it'd be helpful if you can set the scene to some extent and talk about what questions that you're hoping to get answered in particular.
Awesome. Sounds good. Appreciate it, Guy. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is having a great week on the farm. Awesome. So first off, to talk a little bit about, the pump itself and kind of what the parameters we can tune are. So I'm going to be doing a few screen shares. I think, yeah, so, kind of the pump comes with a few parameters that can be tweaked. The first off is the actual formulas that are being used for the pump. In this case, there's both a EMA and an SMA that can be used. And then the third are these three parameters right here. The first of which is, for the EMA that's currently being used, and, for the SMA or just any instantaneous value oracle, how far should the look back be in terms of, how far the value is averaging over? This could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour, could be 15 minutes, could be even longer. That's ultimately kind of one of the decisions that will kind of need to be made, and the hope is to, try to make that decision today. The second is this gamma parameter, which is, some notion of how far the oracle is willing to tolerate a balanced move every block. This could be 100%, it could be 50%, it could be 200%, it could be anything. But today we'll do some analysis and looking at kind of how different variables or how different gamma parameters change how the oracle behaves. Let me quickly. Awesome. So now let's get into things a little. First off, I want to showcase, basically some very simple data about how the oracle performs. Well, I guess first off, yeah, let's share the screen. Awesome. So here are some very simple graphs kind of showcasing some of, kind of the main four oracles that are going to be showcased today are, a geometric EMA, an arithmetic EMA, a geometric SMA, and an arithmetic SMA. You can see in this chart here, this is just, some random distribution about 1,000 with a standard deviation of 50, how these different oracles perform. The first thing to note here is when dealing with concentrated values, meaning values with, a fairly reasonable standard deviation about a mean, you can see that the arithmetic mean and the geometric mean perform almost about the same. You can see this orange and green line here being the EMA geometric and arithmetic are about the same. This SMA here in the purple and red, also behaves about the same between the arithmetic and the geometric variation. Kind of one thing that's very interesting about specifically the SMA is the SMA weights all historical values the same, and you end up in situations like this, where my cursor is, where perhaps X goes up, but the SMA actually decreases. And then you can see in this example, the X goes down and the SMA actually increases. So because the SMA is weighting all of the historical values the same, that first historical value, if it is significantly large, will actually, the value that's leaving the SMA, let's say it's a look back of 10, the 10th value ago, if it's significantly large compared to the one that's being, entering, which is kind of what's happening here, then the SMA is going to move in the direction opposite to X, which isn't really desired behavior. So for that reason, generally tend to favor the EMA. When it comes to instantaneous values query, as it kind of weights the presence slightly more, but we'll get into the specifics a little bit more. Here's just another graph, kind of showcasing some differences between them. So this one is quite interesting. So this one is a one block, or a 2-block MEV manipulation where someone just kind of moves one of the balances in the oracle to be something arbitrary large. And interestingly, you can see kind of how the arithmetic mean EMAs, inflate dramatically more than the geometric. The orange and the green down here are the geometric averages, and you can see how the relative percent increase is dramatically less, where kind of the EMA, or the arithmetic EMA moves over 450%. Kind of these down here, or I guess this would be 400%, barely move maybe like 5. Here's on the downside where someone sets a does the opposite, where someone's setting a balance to be incredibly low. This would be in the case where someone performs a swap and maybe they add a bunch of, one of the balances increases a lot, the other balance decreases a lot. And you can see that the geometric actually performs worse when values are decreasing. However, what's important here is the magnitude on how much it increases with the arithmetic is much higher. We're talking hundreds of percent, where here we're talking something like a decrease of something like 10%. Let's say this is 1.35. So just something to keep in mind is kind of how the EMA and the SMA behave with oracle manipulation. And what we're talking about with oracle manipulation is a arbitrarily large or arbitrarily small value being kind of a data point in the oracle when the malicious actor performs, has access to multiple sequential blocks. I think that's kind of it for this side. And so kind of, I guess to talk, to highlight kind of the problem, once again, that's kind of multi-block MEV, which is, and I guess just for reference, like going back up here, this red line is Uniswap v2, what they use, and the green line is Uniswap v3. So you can see that, yes, the green line using the geometric mean is definitely a lot more manipulation resistant. And, they have a good paper kind of talking about, how expensive, 20% oracle manipulation is. But, personally, or they don't really do any looking into kind of the downside, which to me is like a bit of a red flag, as the downside oracle manipulation is significantly bigger for the geometric mean. So now to maybe take a step back and look at the higher level picture before we continue, what is multi-block MEV? And it's kind of important to talk about how much oracle, what percent oracle manipulation is a protocol willing to tolerate when it comes to how tuning what the parameters of an oracle should be. So maybe just, I know we've talked about multi-block MEV a lot, so maybe just to rephrase it one more time, multi-block MEV occurs when a single actor has control over multiple consecutive blocks, block proposition on Ethereum. On Ethereum, each epoch is kind of the validators that propose blocks for each epoch, which is a set of 32 blocks, is defined ahead of time. And thus, kind of, let's say someone has 10% stake. Each one of these slots, they have, about 10% chance of receiving a block proposition. So you can imagine that 2 consecutive blocks, and again, a very, would be something about, 1/10 squared, which is about 1%. And you can extend that out to multiple blocks. Obviously, that's not exactly correct, as I don't believe that the same validator can propose multiple blocks in an epoch, but that's neither here nor there. So kind of one of the things we need to talk about is first, kind of what does it look like for someone to attack, to try to manipulate an oracle.
Just to pause for a sec and dive into the scope of the problem a little bit more.
Yeah.
I mean, to some extent, if you have a single proposer that has alternating blocks, so they have one block, then they don't have a second block, and then they have a third block, there is like the potential for them to buy the second block and then string together a 3-block MEV. So particularly as markets develop on top of this, and the proof of stake system becomes more efficient, think that this problem extends further. And as we think about what type of resistance Beanstalk needs to consider, feel like it's probably better to think about this in the scope of not just where multi-block MEV is today, but where it could evolve to until there's some sort of like grander MEV mitigation. But for now, it's like we're probably going to get into a worse situation before it gets better.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Publius. Thank you for bringing that up. I guess to talk about what that would look like, it's my understanding that kind of at the start of the epoch, the block proposers are picked, and so it would have to be a pretty fast exchange for someone to buy control over the execution flow.
Not necessarily. You can just pay for like execution of a transaction at the front of a block, right?
Yes, but what you need is a guarantee that no execution is going to happen against your transaction. I guess if it is the last block in the sequence, yes. But it's like you're going to have to pay a lot for that. If you add a trillion one-sided liquidity to a pool, it's going to be very profitable for someone to sell into that. And, you would have to basically pay the cost of the MEV
at the beginning of the epoch. You'd have to lock it in at the beginning of the epoch before you play your cards, so to speak.
Yes, and I guess it's unclear to me how you could guarantee locking in that kind of transaction at the beginning of an epoch. But definitely is something to consider. So I guess to look kind of at kind of this top stakeholders on Ethereum, you can see that Lido has about 30% of the stake split across 30 different entities. I believe they all have about 1%, or you can see here it seems like they all have about 1.4%. These are different entities that are individually controlled and custodied. Coinbase is the single largest stakeholder at about 11.29%, Kraken at 7.58%, then Binance, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're really looking at a few parties with more than kind of 1% stake, but, kind of going back to what would the largest potential attack on, an Oracle be, would probably be that of a nation state. Where some nation state is somehow kind of taking control of validators existing within its own country, and then perhaps taking advantage of a stable coin custodian that also presides in their country, and using that to mint kind of an infinite amount of currency that is paired with Beanstalk. So in the case of, for instance, the U.S. government, perhaps they might take control of Coinbase, being a U.S.-based company, and then they have control of about 11.3% stake, and then maybe they can go to Circle and get Circle to perform some kind of flash mint of infinite USDC that then gets added as one-sided liquidity to a Bean USDC pool. The pool having a 0% fee. This is a free manipulation in the sense that in doing so, the only fee they pay is gas and the potential profit they would have, for including other transactions in the blocks. So it's very minimal. And then, they would leave that in there for as long as the multi-block MEV presides, and presumably on the last block they have access to, or if they're able to pay the next block provider, as Publius was saying, to get the first transaction in the block, they would remove that seemingly kind of infinite liquidity. So over here, we can see kind of, and I guess one more note on multi-block MEV before we continue is that it seems like it's a general sentiment in the Ethereum community that forecasting who gets to propose what block is generally bad. And there's been numerous discussions and topics about single slot proposer elections, or some sort of randomness occurring at every single individual block. So there's no time to kind of forecast whether if a multi-block MEV instance is going to occur. The multi-block MEV is only able to be manipulated because the validator is, the entity is able to know ahead of time how many blocks they have direct control over in a row. If it is purely random, they no longer have a guarantee that they're going to have access to X blocks in a row. So the next thing to look at is this chart where we can see kind of.
Publius, could you first describe the effect that sort of attack would have on Beanstalk? Maybe if it's not obvious to everyone listening.
Yeah. What this sort of attack would have is, again, in the instance where, they mint seeming, kind of infinite USDC, and then add that one-sided liquidity to the pool. The downstream implications of this are, any sort of oracle would register some number of consecutive blocks where the balance of one, the USDC token in the pool is incredibly high. And, they could also, what this would mean is that the price of being in the pool would be incredibly high. And when it comes time for the season would overly, kind of excessively mint a lot of extra beans, as even, one block out of the whole hour or 2 blocks out of the whole hour at, a 1,000,000% increase is quite substantial. In the case of the depositing in the silo and converting, convert wouldn't actually be affected as it's currently implemented, but think there have been some conversations around changing convert from an actual what is the value now to potentially some sort of EMA, but that's a discussion for later. When it comes to the BDV side, it would allow people to deposit at to deposit their USDC Bean LP tokens, or I guess it would decrease the BDV substantially, in the sense that now the price of Bean is really high, which means the LP token underlying it is extremely low. They could, through some kind of multi-pool arbitrage, make the Bean price incredibly low in a given pool. Let's say they mint a bunch of USDC into the Bean ETH pool. They actually don't just add one-sided liquidity, they buy a bunch of beans and then they deposit those beans one-sided into the bean ETH pool. Now the bean ETH pool has an incredibly low value for bean, and the LP token might be overvalued, and therefore it might allow users to deposit into the silo and receive excess stock temporarily. I think the bigger concern is the excessive minting. Whereas if someone were able to kind of seemingly mint infinite beans, then it would have be very detrimental for the system overall and kind of become a race condition to kind of sell into the liquidity. And it would probably, depending on how many excess beans we're minting, if we're talking thousands or thousands of percent, it could, it could triple 10x the bean supply in a single season, which probably wouldn't be very good. So kind of one of the points that will kind of need to be ultimately decided is what is the percent manipulation that is tolerable, for Beanstalk. Let's say it mints 10% extra beans, 20% extra beans, 50% extra beans. How many extra beans being minted is tolerable for, kind of, and not just tolerable, but optimal for Beanstalk to be able to sustain a significant multi-block MEV attack. I guess, Guy, does that clear things up?
It does. So maybe then it'd be helpful to just briefly talk about why the existing solution doesn't work in the long term. Like the existing solution being that only 1% of delta B is minted, and perhaps that's obvious, but feel like it's worth talking about, because you just mentioned this example of perhaps it's 10% or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Guy. Arbitrarily capping delta B is, it creates an inefficiency. For instance, right now, say there was a participant that, was willing to buy and sew back to peg. This person would be unable to, because the soil value is arbitrarily being capped to 1% of the supply. Where bean might be 900,000 below peg, it's being capped to something like 300,000, and therefore there's this lack of efficiency in the ability for Beanstalk to return to the peg. Instead of the user being able to, in a single action, kind of buy and sew to return it back to peg, they would have to do it over 3 consecutive seasons. And there would be no guarantee that in that second and third season, they would be able to even get any of that soil, as their demand might lead to other people's demand, and ultimately they may only get 1 season of soil. On the flip side, it creates a, when we're above peg, let's say Beanstalk is an equal amount above peg as it is below peg right now, it becomes an eerily similar situation to before replant, where generalized minting was not implemented. Bean was millions of beans above peg, but it was only minting something like 500,000 beans a season, and it creates this feedback loop where kind of the fact that it's not minting quick enough actually kind of leads to more people in the short term entering the system, because it's kind of it's not minting quick enough to return back to peg, which actually kind of leads towards more inorganic demand, as Beanstalk is not able to return the price fast enough. Yeah, I mean, I guess curious if anyone else has any thoughts on this too.
Are the units
very-
in the chart
Go ahead.
on the bottom correct, or should it be multiplied by 100?
Which one?
This chart, the number of multi-block occurrences per year.
These are
Interesting.
correct. So if someone, so kind of this
Wow,
is
it's so high.
so high, right? So, someone with, for instance, Coinbase, about 10% ownership, they're going to have, between one or two 7-block like 7-block strands of block proposition. Very interestingly, Coinbase has already had one. It's been about 5 months since the merge, and there has been a confirmed instance where they have control over 7 back-to-back blocks. So yes, this is incredibly high. Getting back to kind of the notion of, it is kind of in the ethos of Ethereum to move away from, kind of the deterministic block proposition. So, it is probably worth noting that probably sometime in the next 5 years, it can be expected that this, problem is ultimately mitigated and removed. However, it will not probably be in the next year. It'll probably take, 2, 3, 4 years for that to actually happen. So what we're looking at is kind of a short-term problem, and thus, thinking about, kind of mitigating it over the short term is really the goal here, and not necessarily, but that is to say that it could exist for the next 50 years, or Beanstalk's whole lifespan. So it's worth putting into perspective.
Hey, Publius.
Also, yeah.
I have a quick question. Do we? It seems like this pump is sort of being designed specifically to protect Beanstalk from attack vectors. Do we expect that other wells which get deployed, which maybe are not intended to be whitelisted by the Beanstalk DAO, will use this pump? And if so, could you give an example?
Ultimately, it's up to the person deploying the well. There are numerous other protocols that also require some sort of Oracle solution. For instance, Aave, Compound, the main lending protocols specifically today require some sort of Oracle solution. So kind of when a pool is deployed, it'll ultimately need to, and I guess another thing to note is Beanstalk needs USD oracles for everything too. So, if there, in Beanstalk, so if there exists a USDC ETH oracle, and, Beanstalk is willing to accept, let's just say for now, USDC at the price of 1 USD, Beanstalk might actually use the ETH USDC pool to determine the price of ETH in dollars, which it will need to do for the USDC Bean pool. Currently with the Sunrise improvements, Beanstalk is using Uniswap v3 for the ETH price, the USDC ETH price, and there is some parameters similar to the minting cap to kind of set a potential cap on manipulation. But kind of it. So to answer your question, it ultimately depends at the time of pool deployment. It should be noted that oracles are extremely expensive to add to wells. I think it's something like 25,000 gas per transaction just to update the oracle, which is like something like 33% of the gas overall. I guess if anyone knows the actual specific numbers, please shout out. But kind of, so when a well is deployed, ultimately it'll come down to, is there a place for this well as an oracle anywhere within DeFi? And if the answer to that question is yes, then then it probably makes sense to deploy it with a pump. There could be variations of this pump that don't support cumulative time-weighted average oracle queries, or don't support the instantaneous oracle queries that make things cheaper. Everything is customizable and kind of up to the user deploying the well. But lot to consider here.
So
when you go ahead.
just so I understand, the expectation is sort of, depending on what a certain protocol wants, they'll deploy their own. They might take some inspiration from the design of this specific pump, but they'll probably, maybe customize some parameters based on what they're looking for. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the goal here is to, kind of spend time in research creating an out-of-the-box pump that the Beanstalk community feels is satisfactory. And, the thought would be that other protocols can kind of, it's still unclear what the output of this is all going to be. It would be great to have some sort of paper showcasing some of this research we're going to go through today, that will ultimately help other protocols understand what led the Beanstalk community to the decision it made in regards to this pump configuration. And, the hope would be, or the thought would be that, other protocols can kind of use the work that's been done and, probably arrive at a similar conclusion about how to configure a pump to what Beanstalk community did. And therefore, kind of the goal with this composability is to minimize the amount of code that needs to be written twice. So, kind of the hope would be for other protocols to use the existing pump and or a variation of the current pump that might take out one or two of the Oracle values. But, it's ultimately completely up to whoever's deploying the well.
When you say Oracle values, are you referring to the SMA and the EMA, the arithmetic and geometric means?
Yes, I mean, currently, the well employs a geometric EMA and a geometric SMA, as well as, a cap on the maximum percent that the balances can shift every block. And kind of any of the three of those, each of these three costs, some amount of gas per transaction, upwards of 5,000 gas. And let's say multi-block MEV gets fixed at the Ethereum protocol level. Now there's no longer, now it's kind of pseudo-random, who gets to propose a block, and therefore, multi-block MEV isn't as concerning as it is now. Maybe someone removes, the cap on the percent balance change. Maybe someone doesn't see a need to have a time-weighted average oracle. Instantaneous oracles, tend to have more use cases as it gives you the price of something right now. Beanstalk requires the time-weighted average oracle for a season, where it's saying, what is the average over the last hour? For something like a lending protocol or BDV, it probably needs some instantaneous manipulation resistant oracle value that generally comes in the form of some sort of historical average look back to prevent against short-term attacks. But really the goal is to know what the price of the asset is now, as opposed to over some time horizon. So it's very possible that someone doesn't want the time-weighted average, SMA oracle, and maybe they just take that out. They use the balance cap plus the EMA or something.
Okay, totally makes sense. So it seems like we're sort of designing this to cover, these four different values, to hopefully be, used by anyone who wants to use any of those.
Totally. And just to be clear, like the geometric versus arithmetic is a design choice. They're both not, both of them are not going to exist in the well. But, they are two examples of statistical variables that have been used as oracles historically, notably the arithmetic mean in Uniswap v2 in Curve and the geometric mean in Uniswap v3. Also, it should be noted that both those oracles were designed before the merge, which means they were designed not in the context of multi-block MEV.
And the purpose of today's conversation is to converge on which mean we want to use. Is that correct?
The purpose of the call today is to converge on which mean we want to use, arithmetic versus geometric. What time horizon do we want to set on the EMA oracle? I guess, do we even want to use the EMA at all, or do we want to switch that to an SMA? A lot of design considerations around that. Currently it uses an EMA, but it could use an SMA, who knows? And then thirdly, to decide on what percent cap to set as the max percent change of an Oracle value per season. And, in a second, we'll get into a lot of examples of, kind of how it relates to Oracle manipulation overall, as we walk through this exercise.
Awesome. Thank you for the context. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. So I guess, kind of the next step is kind of what is, I guess, before we continue, anyone have any questions or thoughts or comments or discussion topics? Great. So now to get into kind of the first thing we have to kind of decide is what is the maximum number of expected blocks for an Oracle manipulation to occur. You can see here, this outlines the number of times a year that someone with a given ownership, this is labeled as percent. This should be times 100. So this is 5%, 10%, 20%, 25%. The number of times per year that a multi-block occurrence will occur for a given party with that much percent stake. So for instance, someone with 10% is, going to get about half of an 8-block multi-block MEV per year. Everything that's 0, so this only simulates 5 years. So everything that's 0 means that nothing occurred within the 5-year time horizon. But so these are estimations. They're not mathematical, determined probabilities. So they're not necessarily absolute. There's only precision here to, I think, 0.02. So it's like this is less than every 50 years, I want to say. Yeah. So this means that, if it's 0, it means it was 50 years of simulation, and that means it's not expected to happen within 50 years. This one, should be, kind of, it seems like, reran a simulation with less values. For some reason, it never occurred. This was just random occurrence, it seems, but these are all these were all 50 years of simulation, so they're not exact values. So I guess, kind of the question is, given this, what first is the maximum percent ownership that should be taken into consideration?
All right, 5 or 50?
50. Because this is 1 year, and this times 50, because it has an extra 0 and a 5. So this is 50 years. So, the first question is like, where should we look on the percent ownership chart? Lido obviously has 30%, but it's split across 30 different entities. Coinbase has around 11%. So, should around 10% be our target? Curious for thoughts here.
I'd be curious to know what an entity's like Coinbase's percent ownership looked like over time. Like,
Yeah,
is 11% less or more than it was, around the merge? Or I'm not sure if you know the answer to that.
That's a great question. I honestly have no idea. I know that, entities with a large percent of stake have received, a lot of, kind of dissent from the Ethereum community in terms of like, kind of self-capping the percent stake that each entity owns. And it's also really hard to know because withdrawals are not enabled. I think it's something like a month until it's expected. I think early April maybe is when it's expected that withdrawals will be enabled at the Ethereum level. And, kind of currently, all of these entities have only been able to accrue more stake. So someone like Lido, who's accrued 30% stake, can't reduce the amount of stake they own, even if they wanted to, because there's no way to withdraw. So there is some expectation that, hopefully, when withdrawals are enabled, there will be some sort of reshuffling of stake, and larger entities with a larger percent of stake, like Lido in Coinbase, will kind of throttle the amount of stake they have, and the hope is that there'll be some sort of withdrawals from the larger entities to have a more to have things balance out. But it's impossible to predict what's going to happen going forward. But I would say that kind of a month after the merge, though, when things are actually in some sort of equilibrium in terms of both deposits and withdrawals, it'll be way more defined what the actual breakdown is.
And what would the consequences be of making the wrong decision here? And we learn in 3 months that the configuration should be something different.
Making the wrong decision, that would just mean that the maximum percent Oracle manipulation is slightly higher than anticipated. So say we pick a configuration that at a 7-block multi-MEV attack leads to a 10% Oracle manipulation. It might be in a 9-block multi-block MEV occurs, the Oracle manipulation might be 15% instead of 10. If our target was 10, now there's 5% extra. So
at that point, it's like maybe there's some liquidity in the Beneath well. It's like to some extent too late to like I guess if a pump can only be deployed upon well deployment, probably not something that would be changed in the near term. Is that fair to say?
I mean, yes, that's fair to say. However, there's nothing that would stop someone or the general Beanstalk community from deploying a new Beneath well and whitelisting that into the silo and de-whitelisting the old one, maybe decreasing the amount of seeds for it, kind of prompting people to shift their liquidity from the old Beneath well to the new one.
Thanks.
Awesome. So, looking here, it seems like, it's somewhere between 10 to 20% is, the target here. 20% does feel quite high, especially in the fact that, once someone has 33% of stake, they have, they're able to, pretty much control 33% of the attestations already. And, it would move the, so there's implications at the Ethereum protocol security level already. So, it feels like, when we're getting into this territory, we're already getting into territory where the Ethereum network itself is already at jeopardy. So, personally, and it should also be noted that if any of these entities were to perform some sort of multi-block MEV attack, it would be public, right? Like everyone knows all of Coinbase's validators. I think there's some way to see a list of their actual addresses. So for someone, for any of these entities to perform some sort of attack, it would be known. It would be known that, Coinbase performed an MEV attack on, the Bean USDC pool or something. So that's an important consideration. So from this chart, it seems like, somewhere like in the 7 to 10 range is a maximum expectation. Maybe like, 8 or 9. Curious for thoughts on, what people are thinking in this range.
Apologies. Can you just remind us what the difference is between these two tables?
it's the same simulation run twice. They just kind of, this one seems a little bit fucked. So I'm going to get rid of this one. This one is the expected one.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, should have added 0.15 to this list. As, you know, 0.2 feels a bit high. So let's just quickly see what. Anyone have any thoughts in the meantime? Awesome. So maybe while we get in, well, this is running, we can start to look at some actual, you know, data. So, you know, kind of again, getting into, you know, so kind of the goal here is kind of given, you know, there's this target of maybe 7 to 9 blocks of a multi-block MEV cap. You know, there's a few parameters that kind of can be tweaked in order to, you know, minimize the attack. The two biggest ones are kind of this cap on the maximum percent change per block, and the look back on the oracle. Going to put a cap of 300 blocks, which is, you know, 3,600 seconds, which is an hour, as, you know, kind of the season time can't really be changed, or the look back on that is quite fixed. So, you know, having a look back greater than an hour would require, you know, a change at the Beanstalk protocol level. So this being, you know, the number of blocks. And so getting into this, you know, kind of here we can see, again, just highlighting how the the arithmetic EMA does not perform well without any sort of cap. Here we're looking at the proportional balance change. You know, this is a balance manipulation of 10 to the x. So for instance, this is about 0 if someone were to set the balance to 10 to the -6. This is, it only goes up to 10 to the 3, you know, which you can see. This is someone, say there's 1 million in a pool. Someone increases the balance by 1,000%. So in this case, it would be someone adding 1 billion liquidity to a pool with 1 million liquidity on each side, let's say. You know, we can obviously explore larger percent increases, but once we start looking at examples with the cap in place, you'll see that it doesn't really matter beyond a certain point. And this, you know, already, you know, this, you know,
say percent increase. Do you mean like times increase?
Yes, times, not percent. Apologies. Thank you for that correction. So yeah, it would be, again, 1 million on each side. Someone adds 1 billion of, you know, liquidity to one side. 1 billion on each side. Someone adds 1 trillion to one side. So you can see already with the arithmetic EMA, it's, you know, already way too high. We're already looking at, you know, 700, somewhere between 700 and 800% oracle manipulation without the cap. So, you know, ultimately it was kind of this decision which led to use of the geometric EMA. You know, and then again, importantly on the downside, you know, the geometric EMA performs substantially worse than the arithmetic. But, you know, again, it is, you know, here we're looking at a decrease of 15% compared to, in the above case, the arithmetic EMA goes up, you know, 600%. You know, it feels like the geometric EMA on the downside is less volatile than the arithmetic on the upside. And awesome. So I might have to just rerun all of this to get things synced up. Great. So here, here we're seeing oracle manipulation as a function of the number of MEV blocks. Blue is a 2-block MEV, orange is a 3-block, G is 5, green is 5, red is 7, purple is 9. So for instance, here being the 0 point, again, this is the EMAG. The 300 OB stands for 300 blocks on the look back. So this is 300 blocks, and here we're varying the number 300. You know, we're looking back a full hour, and we're kind of varying the amount of blocks that the MEV occurs over, and looking at how that affects the manipulation. So for instance, you can see with a 2-block manipulation, it's something like 5%, but in a 9-block manipulation, we're looking at well over 100%. This is proportional change, so 2 is 100%. You can see on the downside, it's well below 80% on the 9-block multi-block MEV. The kind of point that's attempting to be showcased here is that without some sort of cap on the maximum percent change per block, it does not seem like it's possible to have a manipulation resistant oracle. This, for example, is Uniswap v3's oracle. You can see that, and again, this one goes up to 1E6 on the highest end, which means someone's adding $1 trillion to $1 million pool, which is a lot. But one thing that's really important to note as a difference between the wells and Uniswap v3 is that the wells have an option to have no fee, which means any sort of multi-block MEV manipulation on the balances is going to be free. So again, say for instance, someone like the U.S. government wants to come and somehow try to find an attack vector to Beanstalk. They could theoretically mint infinite USDC through Circle, and because there's a 0% fee in a well at the end of the multi-block MEV, they still get that all of the USDC they minted back, and therefore it would essentially be free. And perhaps it makes sense to add some sort of micro fee to such that there is a cost to that kind of attack. That's a discussion topic that I'm totally open to happening. But think there are other ways to mitigate oracle manipulation, which we'll get into shortly. I guess before we continue, or we can go back here and see kind of what happened. So it seems that 0.15%, I don't know what happened, but it's like not being very, I think, yeah, because it's 0.02 is the maximum anyway. Yeah, maybe this table was fucked. But you can see that, at 15%, it seems like, again, 9 blocks is kind of a limit. So, think, we want to be looking at for a maximum multi-block MEV of 9 blocks. For reference, in Uniswap's article about how multi-block MEV affects their oracles, they use 7 as the max, but 9 might be safer. So now let's get into kind of okay, great. So this one. This one just is showcasing the different manipulation, how, with 9 blocks, the effect on the oracle manipulation is much less than that of, say, 2-block. And kind of you can see here that, someone with 15% of stake, maybe that's the upper bound for where we might expect Coinbase to go over the next few months. 9 blocks would happen every 25 years. 8 blocks would happen every other year. 7 blocks is a fairly normal occurrence, and as stated, it's already happened. Great. So let's get back into this. So what this graph is showcasing is so this is a 2-block multi-block MEV, and it's showcasing the difference between the lookbacks. So green is a 1-hour lookback, orange is a 30-minute lookback, and blue is a 15-minute lookback. So you can see how in the case of a 2-block multi-block MEV, kind of the oracle manipulation on 15 minutes is substantially more, maybe up to something like 4 to 8 times more than that of an hour. So, as we're going through the, as kind of the last step, which is kind of introducing the percent cap into this problem, we'll need to experiment with different oracle lookbacks, and you can see kind of how what the lookback is really important in terms of the maximum manipulation. So let's get into it a little. So now, we're looking at, this is a 7-block multi-block MEV. Maybe we'll just get rid of this outlier here. What is that? Yikes. Great. Okay. It didn't work. Oh no. Okay, we're just trying to remove this gray line because it's really out there. But whatever. We can leave it in. Here, we can see kind of now we are adding some sort of cap. Let's maybe just set this to like 9, as that was kind of discussed to be the highest limit. So here we can see kind of the effect of adding some sort of cap. And maybe to showcase what the difference between no cap is, we can add no cap here. So kind of first, kind of before we go ahead and remove this cap, it's important to see what the cap. So uncapped, this is a 9-block 9-block MEV. You can see that the EMA, really does not, or the arithmetic mean really does not, is not resistant to any sort of manipulation. Maybe let's just look at the geometric case so that things aren't ridiculous. Here you can see kind of the effect of some sort of cap on the single block manipulation of, and maybe we'll add 2 here so we can see them all. Maybe not, that's too many lines. So this is the effect of putting some cap on the maximum % change per block. You can see, and maybe we'll just remove this lower bound. We need the lower bound, it seems. Great. Again, here is the break-even point, but you can see that where this cap, where the normal line extends beyond, kind of up and down, the other lines, the geometric mean EMA has a cap of 100% per block, which means that the balances per block could change up to 100%. This would be like someone dumping into the liquidity pool pretty much everything. When you look at a normal function, I guess the question is, so now to start discussing caps, what is the cap? The cap is the maximum % change that the oracle is willing to accept as a legitimate value per block. And what this would mean is, immediately after someone performs some sort of swap, the next block, someone performs some drastic, swap back. So in this case, 100% balance change would mean in the span of, 1 block after someone last performed some sort of trade, someone either doubles the size of liquidity in the pool or performs some swap to kind of drain everything from the pool. Think that 100% is a pretty good limit in terms of, the slippage incurred on a swap or add liquidity of 100% is so drastic that, so it wouldn't really make sense for someone to perform this action as a legitimate action. In the instance where, say, there's 1 million USDC and 1 million beans in a pool, someone puts 1 million in, they might recognize like 50% slippage on this trade. One-sided liquidity, maybe it's like 33% slippage in a constant product pool. But the point is like, for someone to move the balances by more than 100% in a legitimate fashion is quite rare. Someone could add 2-sided liquidity, kind of adding both beans and USDC to the pool in equal proportion. But that wouldn't actually change the price at all. So, if someone were to add more than 100% two-sided liquidity, there would be a situation in which the Oracle balance, is now kind of lagging behind the actual balance a little. But it should be noted that it's already doing that, given that it is already using some sort of historical mean, meaning it's always going to be kind of lagging behind the instantaneous price. So the downside of adding a cap is quite low. This is loosely, kind of after we had already started, working on these oracles. I think it was one point during the during the crash, or the crypto crash. I think it was when SBF tweeted that FTX's liquidation engine has a maximum percent change of 20% in 15 minutes. So having a maximum percent change of 100% in 12 seconds is already significantly more malleable than what has been used by centralized alternatives. So just a data point there. You can see here that in this graph with a 9-block multi-block MEV, we're looking at something like 45% Oracle manipulation without a cap. And with a 50% cap, we're looking at something like 10% Oracle manipulation. And with a 100% cap, we're looking at something like 20% Oracle manipulation. Now let's quickly showcase, just for the sake of what this looks like with the arithmetic here. You can see that with the arithmetic, with a 100% cap, we're looking at an increase of up to 350%. So for this reason, still feel comfortable going with the geometric over the arithmetic, even with a cap in place. Kind of looking at the even with a 50% cap, we're still looking at like a 50% Oracle manipulation, and the geometric mean is still performing better on the upside. On the downside, both the arithmetic means perform better, but kind of looking at this 50% EMA, it has a 9% decrease. The 100% cap has about a 15% decrease. So already we're seeing. So remember that, and let's put the max back in. Kind of already we're dealing with ranges where it's a 50% increase to the upside of the arithmetic. With the geometric, we're looking at very similar manipulations on the upside, where kind of the 50% gets us about 15% on both sides. So although the arithmetic is extremely limited on its downside manipulation potential, think the geometric has a nice distribution where the maximum percent manipulation on the upside is equal to the maximum percent manipulation on the downside. So I guess kind of curious, for any thoughts here in terms of, does anyone have any strong opinions about, where, kind of the cap, the arithmetic mean. This is 9 blocks at an hour-long look back. Just curious for thoughts so far, if anyone has any.
I have a couple questions. The first question is, with these graphs here, do you know the alpha parameter we use for these? Or I guess would the alpha parameter affect, for example, the maximum manipulation given the block?
Yeah, so it uses an alpha parameter of there's kind of this formula where alpha equals 1, or it equals smoothing over 1 plus n. I haven't actually looked at the formula in a while, but kind of this is the general the general formula used for EMAs, where smoothing is generally set to 2, and then n is the look back. So in this case, in this graph, we're using an n of 300, which means it's about a 300 block look back. So the alpha parameter is being tuned to an hour-long look back. Why this formula is used with a smoothing of 2 is because with a smoothing of 2 in this formula, the central mass of, or what's it? I don't remember the exact name, but like the center of mass of the EMA is the same as the center of mass as the SMA. So when kind of comparing EMA to SMA, this formula is used as they tend to behave similarly in regards to time look back. So kind of, the expectation here is that this is, a 300 block look back, but we could include, a 30-minute look back here. And so you can see here that the green and the blue line are a 30-minute look back with 50% and 100% cap respectively. You can see it drastically increases the percent manipulation. But, we could add in we could also add in a lower cap of 25% per block, which, isn't a ridiculous thing to do. And, that behaves very similarly to the 300 block, with a 50% cap. Does that answer your question? And what's your next question?
Yes, and I guess ideally you said that during the upside we want a geometric mean price. Almost if when we're in a downside we want an arithmetic. But the issue is that if we were to store both the geometric and arithmetic, and I guess to use that for delta V, while it will limit the manipulation, it would cost significantly more, like 25,000 gas to store both, right?
Yeah, I mean it's a good point, Breen. There even could be some, especially with the EMA, because where each update of the EMA is kind of independent. There could be a situation in which kind of it says if the value's decreasing, use the arithmetic mean. If the value's increasing, use the geometric mean. Kind of, however, it seems like, looking here, it seems like, for instance, looking at this green line, right? The maximum percent manipulation is just less than 40. On the downside, it's just less than 30. So from some perspective, it doesn't really seem like it would make too big of a difference, as the maximum percent on the upside is still greater than the maximum percent on the downside. However, like if the downside is of a particular concern in this graph, there could be the potential to explore an option that uses some sort of combination of both. It's just at that point it's getting into kind of unexplored territories where it seems like it's kind of just making some stuff up. In terms of, I'm personally not aware of any instance where someone tries to combine the two of them, and thus it's unclear whether doing that is like legitimate from an Oracle perspective at all. So personally think it makes sense to kind of stick to one or the other. Both could be included, sure. Maybe some sort of average of the two is taken, but like even then, if the average of the two is taken, looking back at the maximum percent manipulation, up here, it's like even if the average of these two is taken, we're still looking at 350% manipulation, to the point where it's like the arithmetic mean is so bad on the upside that like unless we completely ignored it, it doesn't seem warranted to include it at all. Or unless we completely ignored it on the upside, yeah, it doesn't seem, and like maybe use it on the downside. It's hard to know. But yeah,
what do you think about doing like a min?
A min of the two?
Like a min of the absolute value.
yeah, I mean, I would just be using the arithmetic mean when decreasing and a geometric mean when increasing, which is totally an option. Happy to explore that, and unfortunately, don't have that situation prepared in front of me. But kind of could happy to explore that if that's something that people think is interesting. But would personally like to see some historical situation in which someone has tried to use this before. Some or that sort of distribution historically. But yeah, I mean it's definitely warranted. The geometric mean performs not great as it tends towards zero. I mean, like, which isn't great. There probably need to be some minimum balance of 1 set as like the oracle parameter to prevent it from going too low. However, it should be noted that, it's impossible for a pool to reach 0 unless someone removes all liquidity. But, definitely something that, can be considered if people think is helpful. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much everything that wanted to showcase today. Personally, this, upon, doing this, reflecting on these results myself, feel like the either the 0.5 GMA with 300-day look back, with 300 block look back, or the 1.0 GMA or EMA with 300 block look back, are the most valuable. Also potentially the 25% with a 30-minute look back. I guess, kind of looking at a maximum percent change here between 10 and 20%, seems pretty reasonable, given that, a 9-block MEV is going to occur, could occur, like once every 50 years. Or 25 years from Coinbase. Yeah, I mean, curious for people's thoughts here and kind of how, or what data people would want to see in order to further get closer to some sort of conclusion here.
Is the idea that these caps are implemented for every pump, or specifically the Bean ETH pump?
I mean, again, like that decision can be made on a pump by pump basis, and that's kind of the point of abstracting the pump out. But personally think any oracle existing in a world with multi-block MEVs should enforce some sort of cap, as otherwise the percent manipulation could theoretically be infinite in the case of in the case of some sort of nation state attack.
Yeah, agreed. I just think that, perhaps for Bean ETH, well, the cap can be a little bit higher compared to, with, let's say, a stable swap, pump, for instance. But I think 25 or 50% is a good number in my opinion. I think 100 is a little bit extraneous.
Great. So I guess, let's zero in on that range. I mean, is there anything here? So from these 4 values, right, where it's like now we have 25% cap, 50% cap, 30-minute look back, and 1 hour look back. Are you inclined towards picking any of these specifically? And if so, why?
No inclination here. I would honestly have to take this Python Builder notebook, kind of do some stuff on my end.
Great. Well, go ahead and share this in the chat. I guess in the meantime, kind of what do people think makes the most sense in terms of, trying to reach some sort of collective conclusion in terms of, what should be done here?
Has this notebook been anywhere?
Has it been what?
These notebooks these notebooks for people to play around with?
I just put this notebook in the barnyard chat. Here's the other notebook, which is used to kind of generate the percentages for multi-block MEV, this notebook. And I guess between the two, hopefully, should be able to, mess around with all of these values yourself. I guess maybe given that, it seems like people want to be able, play around with these things themselves. The percentages, kind of all that's needs to be done is kind of create some sort of cell that looks like any of these other ones. MEV and kind of everything that's, percentages is used to set the x-axis. All of these four kind of are used to define each individual line. It'll perform like some full join on all of them, where it's like for each one, create a different block or create a different line. You can refer to, examples up here on how to switch to an arithmetic. You can add SMA here. I'm curious if I have an example of that already. I thought I had prepared something that compared the SMA, but I guess not. I guess anything else that people would like to see today, or do people think it makes sense to come to sort of, there's no need to come to any sort of conclusion today. It would just be good to kind of drill in on a specific range, or at least, curious to, for if this is substantial enough, people play around with it for, a day or two, to come to some sort of conclusion, or how do people suggest we ultimately make that decision?
One last thing before we, I guess, conclude. We've, I guess, zoned in into the 7 to 9 block range because we think the probability of like someone manipulating the well once every 50 years is acceptable. Is everybody generally okay with that time frame? Or do we want longer, shorter, et cetera, et cetera?
It makes sense to me. I was hoping one of you guys could summarize what all the other decisions that we'd have to make would be.
So the main decision is, what to set here as the number of block look back, and what to set as the cap. So for instance, we take these four lines, the blue and the green are a 30-minute look back on the Oracle, with a 25% and 50% cap respectively. The orange and the red on this graph are 300 block or 1 hour look back with a 50% and 25 cap respectively. It seems like we've narrowed in on this range, as somehow, as being the kind of desired range, but ultimately the decision we want to make is, what is the look back, is that's what sets the alpha parameter on the Oracle, and what is the cap, as that's what sets the gamma parameter on the Oracle. And those are the two parameters that the pump has.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, my phone. I have a question on, in the context of Beanstalk, what would the downside look like here? Because I feel like we focus a lot on the upside, which makes a lot of sense. And I think just from what you've been saying, Publius, I think going with the geometric mean makes more sense over the arithmetic. But I'm thinking, like, in terms of like an attack vector, what would a downside be? Well, we're looking at negative balance changes.
Yeah, that's a great question. So negative balance changes, are likely going to be very similar as, say you have a Bean USDC, a negative balance change could be the number of beans in the well going close to zero, which is, kind of like if someone were to swap a bunch of USDC into the well and remove a bunch of bean from the well, now we're seeing a situation where the number of USDC in the pool is increasing drastically and the number of bean in the pool is decreasing drastically. Now, in this case, what this would mean is that kind of, delta B would be much higher, and the BDV of the LP token would be much lower, and the bean price would increase drastically. There could be the opposite situation, in which case someone dumps a lot of beans in the pool, and this would set the USD value, the number of USDC in the pool, to quickly approach zero, and the number of beans in the pool to approach infinity, which would mean that a lot of soil will be minted, or the LP token in the well would be incredibly overvalued. So there is no kind of, there is not like, it's not mutually exclusive kind of what is the effect of manipulation on the upside and manipulation on the downside. I guess, kind of dumping USDC in the pool to buy bean is a lot easier of an attack vector than dumping a bunch of bean in the pool, just because dumping a bunch of bean in the pool would require someone to accumulate a lot of bean, which would probably mean they either have to like secretly pile up in in the background, or kind of dump into another pool in order to then dump the beans back into, say, the bean, they could dump into the ETH bean pool and then dump into the bean USDC pool. But that would have a net neutral effect on delta B probably. Honestly, it would depend on what the pricing functions are, et cetera, et cetera. But kind of, I would say the biggest thing on the downside would be someone actually performing a swap in the bean USDC pool by putting a bunch of USDC in, taking the bean out, and now the number of beans in the pool is quickly approaching zero.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess for now, I can understand why Uniswap probably went with the upside over the downside. But like in a future context where maybe demand for bean in other protocols is much higher than it is now, that downside might kind of fuck us. I'm not sure though.
Yeah, I mean, it's something to consider. I mean, would you say here that here there's a like, for instance, looking at this red line where it's like the Oracle is plus or minus 5%. I mean, I guess I would say it's like the effect, say there's a bean USDC pool and it's currently balanced. If the USDC value goes up by 5% or the bean value goes down by 5%, it's probably going to have about the same effect on the minting. So what seems to matter from that perspective is the maximum percentage manipulation overall, and it doesn't necessarily matter if it's upside or downside. I mean, that being said, it's like, because upside is increasing the values, it is probably going to be slightly less. But given we're dealing in a range of a maximum of 5 to 15%, don't think the difference between 0.85 and 1.15, 1 over 0.85 or 1.15 over 1 is kind of the difference. So 1 over 0.85, 1 over 0.85 is like 1.17. So, kind of a 15% Oracle manipulation to the downside is the same as a 17% to the upside. Which is, kind of about the same. So if we're already thinking in the range of like a maximum of 10%, it's, upside versus downside doesn't matter that much. Now, if we were thinking in the realm of, a maximum downside of 50%, a 50% downswing is 100% upswing. 1 over 1 minus 0.5 is 2. So as the maximum percent Oracle manipulation increases, it's definitely more important to focus on the downside. But if we're already restricting ourselves to kind of narrow ranges, there's less of an effect. But, I really appreciate you bringing this up, because it certainly is something that needs to be taken in the context of, making these decisions is, kind of what is the impact of upside manipulation versus downside manipulation.
Cool, nice. I have another question on just multi-block number. And I guess this is where I have total ignorance here. but like why kind of focus on the long tail here and not like the short side? Like in terms of using an MEV of 9 or 7 as opposed to the lower end. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to quickly add 2 to this graph. Let's just make this 0.5 just to showcase the difference. So here you can see with the 50% cap at an hour-long look back, the 2, is pretty much unmanipulatable. Kind of what at least, kind of it might make sense to focus on is the worst possible situation, right? An exploiter is not necessarily going to, an exploiter probably playing their cards right is going to target the maximum possible impact they could possibly have. But it should be taken in the context that looking back here at this chart, it's like, Coinbase could be performing 167,000 multi-block MEV attacks per year, which, that's like hundreds a day. So it's definitely important to be looking at this situation. But, if, Coinbase plays their cards in the fact that they perform, a multi-block MEV once, even if it is a 2-block, that gives the Beanstalk DAO time to kind of react and, kind of make some sort of change, as in response to that. So, from Coinbase's perspective, it probably makes the most sense to wait until they have as many blocks as possible to then play their cards. Because once you play your cards, it's like then everyone else knows that you're trying to do this, and therefore some sort of reaction can be kind of taken into account. I'm not sure if that made sense, but
No, that did. Yeah, that made a lot of sense.
Some other things to note about things that have been considered, kind of adding some sort of Boolean to the oracle that specifies whether the current balance is outside of the tolerable range, and kind of just disabling the oracle altogether, or disabling the ability to use the oracle altogether if it's outside of the range, like prevent, so if anyone moves the oracle outside of the range, it kind of shuts off. That's also an option, but that then there's kind of like potential downtime, and people probably want to start acting or reacting to any sort of manipulation immediately. So a lot of things to consider, and it's really important, I guess, bringing up this point around, 167,000 manipulations. Let's say the DAO doesn't react is quite significant, even at about a 5%, change. So, appreciate you bringing that up.
So, in terms of next steps, do you think that it makes sense to construct some sort of combination on the upside and downside EMA and the EMA and the SMA, or do you want to move forward with some sort of like written discussion on what are the questions moving? We should advance this, and should we continue this on the next dev call? Like, I feel like you're probably in the best position to guide us on all that.
Yeah, I mean, kind of from my perspective, like I think there's enough here, and kind of, if there is serious concern, like just going with something like a 0.5 cap, hour-long look back, a maximum of plus or minus 0.5%, or, I guess we're looking at this one. Just add it back. I mean, from my perspective, like if there is serious concern, we can just continue to restrict kind of the max and the min using the existing framework. Again, I mean, it just is using some sort of combination of the oracles is kind of, honestly foreign to me. And, it might end up in a situation, I mean, I guess we'll just have to do a lot more experimentation to see if that's a valid solution or not, and just general research. From my perspective, think, looking at something like, either this orange line or this red line, depending on what the tolerance is, like 5% or 10%, do seem like they're sufficiently manipulation resistant. I mean, for like, I mean, I guess let's look at, kind of the goal is that the 9 would never happen, but we look at 7, we're looking at a 2-3% manipulation in this 25% case. We're looking at a 5% manipulation in this 50% case. So from my perspective,
why are we considering the 30-minute look back?
just wanted to, I mean, kind of just wanted to showcase the difference, and that is an option. But, kind of as far as minting is concerned, it's the hour-long look back. What the 30-minute look back would be is for the instantaneous oracle. So that only is, kind of depositing the BDV, kind of the BDV oracle would be, the 30-minute look back if desired.
So for minting, unless the season time were shortened to 30 minutes, it would probably make sense to use a 300 block look back. But then what you're suggesting is for the deposits, which will use, or at least currently use, a more instantaneous but much more MEV manipulable oracle. The idea is to use potentially something shorter than an hour.
Potentially. I mean, I guess kind of it's a good point in the fact that, kind of they need to use the same cap. So it'd be like if we chose the orange for minting, we would have the option of setting the blue for BDV. But, maybe, I mean, I guess it's like to one point, it's like on one, kind of axis, it's like, some sort of blue, kind of BDV manipulation might be considered to be less impactful from the fact that it's like if someone gains a lot of stock, then the Beanstalk DAO could kind of perform do some kind of vote to potentially remove that. But even like 5-6% isn't going to make or break Beanstalk. So I guess it's like, but to some degree, it's like it could make sense to leave them at the same level. But to your point, yeah, I mean, really the bigger decision is kind of between the 0.5 cap or the 0.25 cap.
And that's
And-
because the way that the pump works is that you can look back over multiple lengths without requiring any additional gas cost, but you cannot look back over multiple caps without increasing gas costs. Is that correct?
You can, so for the time weighted average, you can look back over longer lengths. For the EMA, it's going to be coded into the well itself, and the cap has to be coded into the well itself, as both of those.
Both the length and the cap. So
for the SMA, the length does not need to be encoded in, as it's time weighted average. You snapshot the start and then you snapshot the finish. Take the average over the snapshot.
But given that we're considering EMAs, it's not. That's
yes, but minting will always use the SMA. So it's like if we set the EMA to 30 minutes, the season would still use an hour, but BDV would use 30 minutes. And, unfortunately going to have to go mobile here in a second. So I'm going to have to end my screen, but, hopefully everyone has the ability to, run this locally and spin up some graphs. Maybe we'll just screenshot this one in particular and put it in the Barnyard chat so people can look at it there if they want.
Let's see when he comes back.
So I'm here.
All right, great. So can you maybe explain why minting will always run on an SMA?
Yeah, I mean, kind of the goal is to mint based on the average over the entire season. With the EMA, it gives kind of it weights more recent values higher. For something like minting, what seems to be the goal is to mint based on the average over the entire season equally, meaning if the bean price was slightly higher in the first 15 minutes, then it's important to weight that equally to the last 15 minutes. In the case of the EMA, it would drastically overweight the last 15 minutes. And given how, from as far as minting goes, it feels like every second should be weighted equally. And that kind of is what you get with the EMA or the SMA. Whereas like every second of time ever is weighted equally as far as Beanstalk minting is concerned. With the EMA, again, it would be weighting the last, 15, 30 minutes of, each season drastically higher. And maybe that is the goal, as, kind of that is the actual price at the time. And Beanstalk should wait the last 15, 30 minutes of a season more. As, say it mints beans, it takes people 15, 30 minutes to dump. And therefore, the price at the end is more important. But at least as far as Beanstalk has historically, kind of viewed minting, it's equally weighted every single second. And I guess, would open up the floor now if anyone has thoughts on kind of changing that and moving to an EMA for minting.
I think it's definitely worth considering, particularly given if you look at the history of Beanstalk and soil issuance, that used to be an average over even a long, like a cumulative average over multiple seasons, and over time it was realized that that was inefficient and it was better to issue soil based on just a single season, with a cap as well based on the supply of beans. And there's an argument to be made that it's even more efficient to query some period of time closer to the end of the season, such that Beanstalk is responding to the latest data, assuming that the data is assumed to be manipulation resistant, which is to some extent the entire exercise that we're going through here. So if there's a manipulation resistant query over the past hour, but a weighting towards the past, let's call it 30 minutes of the season, the last 30 minutes of the season, after you have the morning auction, and then you have some sort of price discovery across the various bean markets thereafter, and it may take some time for the system to find its equilibrium for that season. Don't think it's a problem per se to have the system weight more heavily the back half of the season. On the upside, it's a little bit more interesting how many beans to mint, because then in theory you could have interseason volatility towards the end of the season to facilitate minting. Which is worth considering.
Yeah, I mean, great points you bring up. Definitely agree that it's something that, should be considered. I guess it would be important to do some sort of analysis in terms of, how much does the weighting actually change? I mean, I guess kind of as a data point, given this, the EMA doesn't have like a fixed look back. It actually has some sort of the way it works is it multiplies the previous value by some constant and then adds the current value by 1 minus the constant. So it weights the last value by some, close to one number, and then weights the present value by some, very small number. Kind of so in an EMA with an hour-long look back, only 5/6 of it is actually determined by the last hour of data. Which doesn't necessarily mean anything in terms of it shouldn't be used, just is another data point to consider. So it's like, if we go with the hour-long look back over the season, only 5/6 of that data is new data from the current season. Now, obviously, the time frame could be shrunk to like 45 minutes if the goal is to encompass more of the time in the last hour. But just more food for thought. I mean,
So
if
go ahead.
I guess just one more point to make is, not that this really matters that much, but kind of if the decision to use the EMA for minting is determined, it would, first off decrease the cost of the wells overall, as now there, isn't really a need to use it in SMA for anything. The Oracle would only need to track an EMA, but it would make it so the decision to use the SMA couldn't be undone without deploying new pools. And it would decrease the gas cost of the season as it no longer has to snapshot the start timestamp. Just a couple things to keep in mind.
All right, so I think that at this point, there's so many things to consider and parameters to optimize on that there needs to be something more formally written, such that people can consider it. Because to be frank, it's going to be hard for people to spend 2 hours listening to this, and a lot of people will come out still not really understanding what's going on. And so it's important to define a lot of this stuff in written form, and I think that doesn't necessarily mean we need to circle back on this in 2 days unless you want to, but I think it would be very helpful if there was something written up for us to all sort of collectively walk through on the next time that we talk about this and consider the trade-offs explicitly.
Sure. Definitely, happy to write something up. It just, at least on this end, writing something up is obviously going to push back timelines on any sort of deployment by, probably a couple weeks. And so long as everyone is on the same page that is, acceptable, happy to move forward with some sort of, formal writing up here.
Yeah, not sure that we should be making that decision, but that's probably something that
Publius, I think we lost you the last few seconds.
Hello?
We can hear you now.
Sorry, my there's probably some. I mean, it would probably make sense to have like a little straw poll in some capacity with stockholders on how important it is to formally define all this stuff and how that affects timelines. But on this end, would probably support doing it rigorously, or at least doing it semi-rigorously if it took an extra week or two. That seems like a no-brainer. So there should probably be some sort of vote on that.
Vote on whether the write-up should happen or what the parameters would be.
Well, there will be a vote on the parameters when the pool is deployed implicitly. There should probably also be some sort of vote on the parameters beforehand. But at this point, talking more about what is the right level of discourse to be had on the pump front, right? So what's the question is this type of dev call plus a very short write up from someone that was listening to the call, or a summary write up from someone that was listening on the call. You know, is that sufficient? Should we collectively be working on more of a formal paper to define all this stuff? As Publius had suggested at the beginning of the call, how do we want to really think about? Because this is pretty important, both from a security perspective and from a like public good perspective, to make it very clear what's going on, and therefore it's probably, maybe that work can happen immediately after the wells is deployed, but then to some extent it's like, well, maybe the research says that the initial well is not properly deployed, and then we'll have to migrate it, which, maybe that's acceptable. So yeah, suggesting that there is some sort of straw poll, maybe not a formal vote, but a straw poll on what people think about in terms of immediate timelines versus, spending an extra couple weeks as a community really getting into the nitty gritty on the Oracle stuff. I mean, there's also an argument to be said that this is like such an important thing for Beanstalk to get right that it should just, timeline should be pushed back regardless. And, that it would be interesting to gauge community sentiment on all this stuff. So I think it's more of a straw poll that makes sense more than anything. But I don't know, maybe that's ridiculous.
I think in a way, to your point, it's hard to discuss the thing at all without having some sort of write-up, and it's like, I'm not really sure what it would mean to have a straw poll to figure out whether we should spend the time on the write-up itself. Because if so, it's like, what information do people have in order to inform their vote? Like this call recording, I guess.
Yeah, and then maybe some sort of short summary that someone can write up based on this call.
Yeah, something to think about, I guess. I mean, if you're asking me, it sort of feels like overkill, or does feel like overkill, particularly when we're talking about something on the order of 1 to 2 weeks. But yeah, I mean,
well, not sure that is the order of magnitude that Publius was talking about.
Well, maybe Publius can help us better understand.
Better understand what? What order of magnitude?
The extent
What
to
it would
which you
look
think
like to have a formal write up.
Yeah, I mean, not sure. I mean, like what a formal write-up would be is, I mean, like, for instance, there was no actual numbers here in terms of like there's more analysis that could be done in the first place. There's no numbers here that kind of combine the situation that I think it's Sophocles brought up, where it's like, some combination of upside and downside manipulation in tandem. There's no numbers here basically saying like, if the Bean USDC pools have this much, what is the maximum beans that could be minted through manipulation of X blocks. The maximum actual, but I mean, I guess it is kind of implicit in some of this data, but to me, it's like a formal analysis would have to take everything here a step further in terms of like, should actually specify some numbers for these things. Just gonna have to write up pretty much everything that was said on this call in terms of introducing the context, walking through the history of on-chain oracles, kind of some very in-depth comparison of EMA versus SMA, arithmetic versus geometric, kind of all this stuff. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'd be curious to hear kind of what people think is important to include in some sort of write-up. I mean, it's just hard to imagine any sort of, formal, proofread, well articulated article being written in anything less than, a week or so. But, perhaps could be completely wrong on that front.
I mean,
So
I think
If it's a week, go ahead.
I'm trying to think this through in my head myself. I mean, I don't. Given that I've just sat here and listened to this, it's much more understandable and digestible for me. I'm trying to see it from the perspective of someone who wouldn't have even listened to this call and just looked at it, from baseline. I don't know. I feel like, I mean, something elaborate might honestly be overkill in and of itself. Like just defining like what kind of you showed here with, okay, we're gonna use either SMA or EMA. Like I don't think we would have to go in depth, even with like going into the back history of all the Oracle stuff and like just defining the parameters and then giving the examples of, okay, what would be in USDC, a Bean USDC pool, what would happen if we do X with this parameter? What would happen if we do Y with this other parameter? And I don't know, show some graphs. And if people don't understand it from there, then that's unfortunate.
I would just, +1 Sophocles, point around the level of depth of a write-up of sorts. I'm certainly not thinking of a, formal white paper level thing with a documentation of the history of on-chain oracles or anything like that. Not that that wouldn't hurt, but or not that that would hurt, but it's all comes at the cost of time.
Understood. Very helpful color. I mean, but everyone's in agreement in the sense that, like, it's helpful to at least have, spend a couple of days writing up something so that the broader community can digest everything that was kind of discussed on this call in, without having to listen to this full 2-hour kind of call.
And watch it. And watch it.
Maybe a different question, but how long would you hope that this pump can serve as an oracle for Beanstalk?
That's a great question. I mean, the hope would be kind of, I mean, there are several things to consider here. The first of which is, at what point does some sort of on-chain oracle like this become, just unnecessary to where, an oracle is moved to some kind of provable off-chain computation, an oracle is moved to the protocol level, or, there's some sort of orderless, some oracle-less solution that exists. At the same time, kind of solving, an Ethereum protocol upgrade, to remove the ability for multi-block MEV to occur through, single slot random, proposer elections or whatever, also makes it so that the potential, attack vector of this oracle is drastically decreased. And, perhaps there's no need to add a cap at all, as, kind of any sort of multi-block manipulation of the oracle would introduce a significant risk vector in the sense that anyone could dump on them. So probably a timeline of 2 to 3 years, with the expectation that in 2 to 3 years, maybe 1 to 3 years, but probably 2 to 3, the expectation in the next 2 to 3 years, either, some kind of alternative, more efficient, all-encompassing Oracle solution becomes commonplace in terms of, off-chain computation or protocol level oracles. Or, there's an Ethereum protocol upgrade to remove the ability for multi-block MEV to even occur.
Very helpful. I think that's the sort of data point, accompanied by a very short paragraph of explanation is the sort of thing that I would find very helpful in some sort of write-up.
So should this write-up be be stating the question and essentially be a tool for people to, then decide, what the parameter should be? Or should the paper actually propose, a set of parameters that feel optimal given the analysis?
That's a good question. Personally feel like a recommendation would be appropriate, but
It's both.
curious what.
It's both. It's what is the analysis, and then I do think it's appropriate for an opinion
Yeah.
as well. But the honest thing to do is to explain what the analysis is and why this is the analysis.
Awesome. Thank you. This is all super helpful color. So, I think it's clear at this point that the next step is to, try to, formalize this in some sort of short writing that, basically proposes everything that was discussed today in a more succinct, digestible format for a broader audience. And at that point, it can kind of be discussed, and at that point, some decision on these parameters can be made. I guess in terms of how impactful the decision is, like the gamma and alpha parameter, which is the cap and the number of blocks looked back, are parameters of the Oracle itself that can just be changed. If the decision on the Sunrise side is made to mint based off the EMA instead of the SMA, that will actually require modification of the on-chain of the actual source code, and therefore have implications from a kind of an audit perspective. So just wanted to denote that, but I think kind of it's clear that it would be incredibly helpful for the DAO and the community at large to be able to really wrap their head around all of this in a succinct fashion. So on this end, I think that kind of nothing. I feel like the next steps are quite clear, and appreciate everyone for hopping on the phone today and listening to this call, and giving your inputs. And I guess if anyone does have an opinion as of now in terms of kind of what Oracle configuration they might be leaning towards, would appreciate kind of dropping it in the barnyard chat just to get kind of in a preliminary survey
going on the pumps.
Yeah, a thread would be great. But yeah, I mean, just any sort of preliminary survey in terms of where people's head are at would be incredibly appropriate for those who have something.
All right, so we'll put a bookmark in this one, and in a week or so, hopefully have something to talk about in the next in one of those dev calls.
Amazing.
All right, last thing on this end is, do we want to start booking the dev calls for 3 hours so that we can get to more than one topic? Because, again, there's so much to talk about.
It's hard to disagree. Yeah, I mean, an hour on both on both the Tuesday and Thursday calls as they're currently scheduled works here. So We can do that. Although there isn't a good way in Discord to make it clear when an event should end, but we'll figure that out.
Does anyone dissent? Is this too long or long enough? It can be shorter, but is this long enough?
I really thought we were going to run out of stuff by having 2 of these 2-hour calls, but
I mean, I'm not
was a
opposed to
wrong
having it
take.
longer, but I also enjoy it. But I know probably there are going to be times where it's not going to be 3 hours. So
Well, we could just do another topic. Like, we were going to do the whole ERC standard thing, and we didn't even get to that. But then it's like we do that for an hour, maybe we don't even finish that. But we can try to do like a longer topic and a shorter topic. Who knows?
yeah, I feel like keeping it topic based is probably better than bounding it by time. Maybe.
You want unbounded? I can't do I mean,
No, not unbounded. Yeah,
we're looking for a
I
bound.
want your 24 hours in this Discord chat. No, I'm saying the complete opposite. Like, I feel like keeping it to a topic as opposed to maybe like, time wise is probably a better thing. Like, I don't know, after 2 hours, like my brain is already fried from looking at 20 graphs. So even if we were to start something else right now, I feel like people are 25% concentrated. I could be wrong.
Would it be crazy to like come back an hour and a half before class or something like that? Like 2 separate calls on the
Like
same day?
go do some push-ups, man.
Exactly.
We got things to figure out. All right, well, I do actually have to hop now. Maybe we can have a
We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out.
all right. Talk soon, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See ya.